"Get out of the car right now and disappear from my life," shouted the wealthy stepmother as she stopped on an isolated road. Years later, she nearly fainted upon seeing the triplets return with lawyers and a folder of documents that would change everything. The autumn sun bathed the imposing Dumont mansion with a golden light, casting elongated shadows over the meticulously manicured garden. At the center of this idyllic scene stood Claire Beaumont, a 35-year-old woman with emerald green eyes and an enigmatic smile. Delicately adjusting the knot of Thomas Dumont's tie, Thomas was a 60-year-old millionaire widower. "It's perfect now, darling," Claire murmured, her voice as soft as velvet. Her slender fingers lightly brushed the wrinkles on Thomas's face, a tender gesture that made his heart race like a love-struck teenager. Thomas smiled, his weary eyes shining with a renewed light. "You're an angel, Claire," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A true angel sent to brighten my days." Not far away, 3 identical little figures were playing, their laughter echoing throughout the garden. Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael, 6-year-old triplets, ran in circles, their brown hair blowing in the wind. Claire watched them with a look that wavered between tenderness and something else, something indescribable. "Boys!" Claire called out, her melodious voice floating through the garden. "Come over here, let's take a family photo." The triplets instantly stopped their game, their little faces lit up with innocent smiles. They ran toward Claire and Thomas, their polished little shoes tapping against the stone pathway. "Mommy!" they shouted in unison, throwing themselves into Claire's arms. Claire embraced them, laughing as she tried to keep her balance. With gentle, loving gestures, she smoothed the boys' disheveled hair and straightened their bow ties. "You look so handsome, my princes," Claire praised, kissing each one on the forehead. Thomas watched the scene with a mix of joy and disbelief. Just 6 months ago, his life had been a void of loneliness. Now, he was about to marry a wonderful woman and become the father of 3 adorable boys. While the photographer got ready, Thomas couldn't help but reflect on how drastically his life had changed in such a short time. It all began on a rainy spring afternoon. Thomas had decided to visit the grave of his late wife, as he did every year on the anniversary of her death. It was there, among silent headstones and rain-soaked flowers, that he first saw Claire. She was kneeling by a nearby grave, her tears mixing with the raindrops falling on her face. Moved by an instinctive compassion, Thomas offered her his umbrella. It was a simple gesture, yet one that would forever alter the course of their lives. Claire looked up, her green eyes as bright as emeralds, and smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentle even in her sadness. "That's very kind of you." They began talking, discovering they had both lost loved ones. Claire spoke of her late husband and of how difficult it was to raise 3 young children alone. Thomas felt his heart ache with compassion. In the months that followed, Thomas and Claire grew closer. He was captivated by her kindness, her strength, and her devotion to her children. Claire, in turn, seemed to appreciate the stability and affection Thomas offered. The triplets, initially shy, soon grew attached to Thomas. He took them fishing, told them stories, and helped them with their homework. For the first time in years, the Dumont mansion echoed with children's laughter. "Mr. Dumont." The photographer's voice brought Thomas back to the present. "We're ready for the photo." Thomas blinked, returning to reality. Claire stood by his side, the triplets positioned in front of them. It was the perfect image of a happy family. "I never thought I'd have this again," murmured Thomas, his voice choked with emotion. Claire gently squeezed his hand, her green eyes locked on his. "We're a family now, Thomas. Forever." The camera flash captured the moment, Thomas beaming, Claire smiling serenely, and the triplets nestled between them. A perfect family. Yet while everyone smiled for the photo, something strange flickered in Claire's eyes. It lasted only an instant, so brief that no one noticed. Her cool, calculating gleam that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by her previously loving gaze. The wedding reception that followed was spectacular. The Dumont mansion, usually so quiet, was brimming with life and music. Elegantly dressed guests circulated through the ballroom. champagne glasses clinking in cheerful toasts. Claire was the center of attention. Stunning in her wedding gown, she moved gracefully among the guests, her radiant smile never wavering. Thomas watched her with adoration, barely believing his good fortune. The triplets, for their part, were the stars of the party. Dressed in matching suits, they charmed the guests with their sweetness and energy. Lucas, the most outgoing, cracked jokes that made everyone laugh. Gabriel, the thoughtful one, impressed people with his precocious knowledge. Raphael, the affectionate one, handed out hugs and smiles. As the evening progressed, Claire took the microphone to propose a toast. The ballroom fell silent, all eyes turning to the radiant bride. "Dear friends and family," she began, her voice clear and charged with emotion, "I have no words to express the joy I feel today. Thomas, you have brought light back into my life and into my children's lives. Your generosity, your love, your kindness. You are everything I could wish for in a husband and a father to my boys." There was a collective awe among the guests. Thomas discreetly wiped away a tear. "Lucas, Gabriel, Raphael," Claire continued, looking at the triplets, "you are the joy of my life, my little miracles. And now we have a new father who loves us as much as we love him." The boys ran to hug Claire and Thomas, prompting more awes and a few emotional applause from the guests. "To our new family," Claire concluded, raising her glass, "may we have many years of happiness together." "To the family," the guests answered in chorus, raising their glasses. The party carried on into the night with dancing, laughter, and celebration. Finally, when the last guest had left and the triplets were asleep, exhausted but happy, Claire closed the mansion door, leaning against it for a moment. Her smile faltered, only for a second, before returning to her face. She looked up the staircase, where Thomas carried the last of the sleeping boys to bed. "A perfect family," she murmured to herself, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "Absolutely perfect." As she climbed the stairs to join her new husband, Claire's eyes shone with a cold determination. For a moment, her mask of sweetness and devotion slipped, revealing something darker beneath. What lay behind those emerald eyes? What was the real reason for Claire's smile? And what did the future hold for this new and seemingly happy Dumont family? Autumn had given way to winter, and the Dumont mansion, once so full of life and joy, now seemed wrapped in a shroud of silence and sadness. Only 3 months after the wedding that promised a bright future, fate decided to rewrite the family's story in a cruel and unexpected way. Thomas Dumont, the newly married patriarch, had departed this world as suddenly as a candle snuffed out by a gust of wind. A massive heart attack claimed him in his sleep, leaving behind a 35-year-old widow and 3 6-year-old boys, orphaned for the second time. The funeral was a somber ceremony, held on a grey day that seemed to reflect the family's mourning. Claire, dressed from head to toe in black, kept a restrained expression of grief, her green eyes dull and distant. Beside her, the triplets, Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael, looked small and lost in their black suits, their usually cheerful faces marked by silent tears. As Thomas's casket was lowered into the ground, Claire hugged the boys, murmuring words of comfort. "Daddy is in a better place now," she said softly, her voice trembling. "He loved us very much, and he'll always be watching over us." The days that followed were a blur of condolences, floral arrangements, and sympathetic visits. Claire seemed plunged into a deep state of mourning, rarely leaving her room except to see to the boys' basic needs. The triplets, for their part, wandered the mansion like little ghosts, their lost gazes searching for a father who would never return. Lucas, the most outgoing of the three, tried to lift his brother's spirits. "Remember what Daddy Thomas always said," he whispered to Gabriel and Raphael on nights they huddled together in bed. "We're stronger together." Gabriel, the most perceptive, was the first to notice subtle changes in Claire's behavior. "Don't you think Mom is different?" he asked his siblings one night, about a month after the funeral. Raphael, always the most sensitive to others' emotions, nodded slowly. She seemed sad, but in a strange way. As the weeks went by, Claire's moments of deep sorrow began alternating with stretches of an almost unsettling calm. Sometimes she looked at the boys with a distant expression, as if seeing them for the first time. One morning, Claire walked into the living room where the boys were quietly playing. For a moment, she stood in the doorway, watching them with a strange, almost clinical gaze. When Lucas noticed her and ran to hug her, Claire instinctively pulled back, a look of surprise and something like revulsion flashing across her face before it was replaced by a forced smile. "Mom?" Lucas asked, confused by her reaction. Claire blinked, as though snapping out of a trance. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she murmured. "Mommy's just a little tired." She kneeled down and hugged the boy, but her embrace felt mechanical, devoid of the maternal warmth the triplets were used to. The inexplicable moments of coldness grew more frequent. One afternoon, while helping Raphael with his homework, Claire abruptly stopped mid-explanation, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "Mom?" Raphael asked timidly. "Are you okay?" Claire turned her attention to the boy, but her eyes seemed vacant, almost hostile. "Of course I'm fine," she replied, her voice oddly monotone. "Why wouldn't I be?" Gabriel, watching from a distance, felt a chill run down his spine. Something was wrong with their mother, something that went beyond normal grief. Nights became particularly tense. Claire, who used to insist on reading the boys a bedtime story, now seemed to avoid the ritual. When the triplets reminded her, she responded with barely disguised irritation. "Aren't you big enough to sleep on your own?" she asked one evening, her voice laden with impatience that made the boys shrink back. Lucas, always the bravest, tried one last time. "But Mom, Daddy Thomas always said we're never too old for a good story." For a moment, Claire's face twisted in such intense anger that the boys recoiled in fear. But just as quickly as it appeared, the expression vanished, replaced by a cold smile. "All right," she said, her voice oddly calm. "A quick story, then." As Claire read, her voice was monotonous and devoid of emotion. The triplets exchanged worried looks. This was not the loving, caring mother they knew. Something had changed, and they didn't know what or why. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the Dumont mansion grew increasingly tense. Claire's once frequent and warm smiles now seemed forced and empty. Her eyes, formerly full of love and tenderness, often shone with a cold, calculating light. Sensitive to their mother's changing behavior, the triplets began tiptoeing around the house, afraid to trigger her inexplicable wrath. They clung to each other for comfort, sensing that the world they knew was collapsing around them. One night, while the boys slept, Claire roamed the mansion's halls, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She stopped before Thomas's portrait, her eyes fixed on the image of the man who had been her husband for such a brief time. "Why did you have to leave?" she whispered, her voice laden with an emotion hard to decipher. Anger, sadness, or something darker. "You promised we'd be together. You promised you'd take care of us." For a moment, tears glistened in Claire's eyes, but then, as quickly as they had come, they dried. Her face hardened, her eyes taking on a determined, cold gleam. "Well," she murmured to herself, "I suppose I'll have to take care of it myself." With those enigmatic words, Claire turned and walked toward her bedroom, leaving Thomas's portrait behind, along with the last traces of the loving, dedicated woman she once was. Upstairs, the triplets slept fitfully, unaware of the drastic changes about to unfold in their young lives. The future, once so promising, now seemed uncertain and threatening, hanging over them like a dark cloud on the verge of a storm. The summer sun hung high in the sky, pouring relentless heat over the Dumont mansion. It was one of those days when the air seemed to quiver with warmth, and the stillness was broken only by the occasional buzz of a faraway cicada. Inside the house, however, an unusual excitement took hold. Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael, 6-year-old triplets, raced around, their laughter echoing through the mansion's corridors. After weeks of tension and Claire's erratic behavior, this explosion of childish joy felt almost surreal. "Mom said we're going on a surprise trip," exclaimed Lucas, the most outgoing of the three, his eyes shining with excitement. Gabriel, always the cautious one, frowned. "But where are we going?" She didn't say anything. Raphael, sensitive to others' emotions, noticed a shadow pass over Claire's face when she announced the trip earlier. But he brushed the thought aside, too excited about the idea of an adventure to worry. Claire appeared at the living room door, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "Are you ready, my loves? The car is waiting." The boys ran to her, hugging her legs and all speaking at once, bombarding her with questions about the mysterious destination. "Patience," Claire laughed, though there was something off in her laughter, a dissonant note the boys were too young to notice. "You'll find out soon." As they settled into the luxurious car, the triplets could hardly contain their excitement. It was the first time in weeks that Claire had suggested an outing, and the promise of a surprise filled them with anticipation. Claire started the engine and maneuvered the car out of the property. As they left behind the mansion's imposing gates, a strange silence fell over the vehicle. Claire's smile, so bright moments before, now seemed frozen on her face, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Feeling the shift in atmosphere, the boys exchanged puzzled glances. Lucas, always the most talkative, tried to break the silence. "Mum, let's play I Spy with my little eye. I spy—" "Not now, Lucas," Claire cut him off, her voice sharper than usual. "Mommy needs to concentrate on driving." The car continued onward, leaving behind the familiar streets of the city. Buildings gave way to open fields, and soon they were on a rural road flanked by crops stretching to the horizon. Gabriel, the most observant, noted they were getting farther and farther from home. "Mum," he asked timidly, "we're going really far, aren't we?" Claire didn't answer right away. When she did speak, her voice sounded distant, almost mechanical. "Don't worry, honey. We're almost there." The sun began to descend on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening's golden light bathed the car's interior, creating long, strange shadows. Raphael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a feeling of unease growing in his chest. Hours passed, and the landscape kept changing. Cultivated fields gave way to wilder terrain with twisted shrubs and occasional trees, breaking the monotony of the plain. The smooth asphalt of the main road had long been replaced by a dirt road, causing the car to jolt with every bump. Lucas, normally so chatty, had gone silent, his wide eyes watching the unfamiliar scenery through the window. Gabriel bit his lip, trying to understand why they were going so far from home. Raphael, the most sensitive, felt tears welling up in his eyes, though he wasn't exactly sure why. Claire drove in silence, her eyes glued to the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white. From time to time, she glanced quickly in the rearview mirror, her eyes meeting the boys for a brief moment before returning to the road. The sun was almost set when Claire finally slowed down. The car stopped on the shoulder of a deserted stretch of road, raising a small cloud of dust. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and the children's nervous breathing. Claire turned off the engine and sat still for a long moment, her hands still clamped to the steering wheel. Then, slowly, she turned to face the triplets. "Get out," she said, her voice as cold as ice. The boys froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. They looked at their mother, hoping for a smile or a sign this was just a joke. But Claire's face remained impassive, her green eyes flashing with a strange, frightening light. "Mom," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "What's going on?" "Get out of the car right now and disappear from my life," Claire shouted, her voice filled with a rage the boys had never heard before. Shaking with fear and confusion, the triplets opened the car door and stepped onto the deserted road. The day's heat still hung in the air, causing the asphalt to shimmer. A warm summer breeze ruffled their hair, carrying the scent of dust and dry vegetation. Claire watched them for a moment, her green eyes reflecting a whirlwind of indecipherable emotions. For a brief instant, something like regret passed over her face, but it was quickly replaced by cold resolve. "Mom, please," Raphael begged, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Don't leave us here." Gabriel, always the rational one, tried to reason with her. "There must be a mistake. Did we do something wrong? We can fix it, I promise." Lucas, normally the bravest, was in shock, unable to form words, his wide eyes fixed on his mother's face. Claire shut her eyes for a moment, as though gathering strength. When she opened them again, every trace of emotion had vanished. "You don't understand," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I never wanted this. I never wanted you. It was supposed to be just me and Thomas, our perfect life. And now Now he's gone and I'm stuck with you. I can't take it anymore." With those words, Claire slammed the car door. The sound reverberated through the empty landscape, making the boys flinch. "Mum!" Lucas finally found his voice, shouting desperately. "Please, don't go." But Claire had already started the engine. With one last look in the rearview mirror, she floored the accelerator. The car sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust that engulfed the triplets. The boys stood there, paralyzed, watching their mother's car disappear into the horizon. Tears streamed down their faces, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. "Mom!" Raphael cried out, his voice breaking. "Please come back!" But the only response was the distant echo of the car's engine, growing weaker until it vanished completely. The sun finally set, plunging the landscape into deepening shadows. The triplets huddled together, arms around one another for comfort and warmth. "What do we do now?" Gabriel whispered, fear evident in his voice. Lucas, always the leader, took a deep breath, struggling to control his own tears. "We stay together," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "We have each other. We'll find our way back." As the first stars began to appear in the sky, the triplets held hands and started to walk down the deserted road. They had no idea where they were going, but they knew that as long as they had each other, there was hope. The night wind whispered around them, carrying the distant echo of Claire's final words, "Disappear from my life." But as they moved on, step by step, into the growing darkness, the boys silently promised one another that no matter what happened, they would never abandon each other. Darkness fell quickly on the deserted road, swallowing the last rays of the setting sun. Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael walked hand in hand, their small shadows merging into one in the gathering gloom. The asphalt still radiated the day's heat, but the air was starting to cool, causing the boys to shiver in their light summer clothes. Lucas, always the leader, tried to maintain a brave front. "Let's keep walking," he said, only a slight tremor betraying his fear. "There has to be a town somewhere nearby." Gabriel, the most rational of the three, looked around anxiously. "But it's getting really dark, Lucas. What if we get even more lost?" Raphael, the most sensitive, gripped his brother's hands more tightly. "I'm scared," he whispered, silent tears sliding down his cheeks. As night advanced, the sounds of nature seemed magnified. The distant croaking of frogs, the occasional call of a night bird, and the rustling of leaves in the wind formed a strange and eerie symphony for these city boys. Suddenly, a different noise pierced the air, the unmistakable sound of an approaching engine. The triplets froze, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and hope. "Could it be Mum?" Raphael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Gabriel answered, squinting into the darkness. "It's too big to be her car." A pair of headlights came into view as the vehicle rounded a bend in the road, illuminating the three terrified boys. It was a huge truck, and it slowed as it drew near. The driver stopped a few feet away, and the cab door opened with a creak. A tall, burly man climbed down, his figure outlined against the truck's headlights. "My goodness," he exclaimed, his voice deep yet kind. "What are you kids doing out here all alone?" The boys looked at each other, unsure what to say. Finally, Lucas spoke up, his voice quavering slightly. We got lost, you sir." The man approached slowly, as if afraid to scare them. As he got closer, they could see his kind face, framed by a grey beard. "My name is John," he said softly. "Is there any way I can help you?" Something in John's gentle voice caused the boys to lower their guard. Raphael began to sob, and Gabriel put a protective arm around him. Lucas, feeling the weight of responsibility, decided to trust the stranger. Our mum left us here," he admitted, the words coming out haltingly. "We don't know how to get home." John's face contorted with shock and compassion. "Oh, you poor kids," he murmured. Then, making up his mind, he continued, "Listen, there's a roadside diner a few miles away. How about we go there? You must be hungry, and we can figure out what to do next." The triplets looked at one another. The mention of food made their stomachs rumble, reminding them they hadn't eaten since breakfast. Slowly, they nodded. John helped the boys climb into the truck's cab, making sure they were secure before driving off. The warm interior was a welcome relief after the cool of the night. 15 minutes later, they arrived at a small diner lit by bright neon signs. John guided the boys inside, choosing a discreet table in the corner. A middle-aged waitress approached, her eyes widening at the sight of the three exhausted children. "What happened here?" she asked John. "It's a long story, Mary," John replied. "For now, let's feed these kids, okay?" Soon the table was filled with steaming plates, burgers, fries, and milkshakes. The boys ate ravenously, the hot, comforting food calming their frayed nerves. As they ate, John spoke gently with them, learning their names and a bit about their situation. His heart ached at the story of their abandonment, and he exchanged worried looks with Mary, who occasionally checked to make sure they were all right. When they finished eating, the triplets' eyes were heavy with sleep. John looked at the clock and made another decision. "It's too late to do anything else tonight," he said kindly. "How about you sleep in my truck? There's a small bunk behind the cab, and tomorrow morning we can go to the police to sort this out." The boys, exhausted and emotionally drained, agreed without hesitation. Back in the truck, John fixed up the small bunk with extra blankets, creating a cozy nest for the triplets. Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael settled in together, their small bodies huddling close for comfort and warmth. John covered them carefully, his heart heavy with sadness over what these children had been through. "Sleep well, boys," he whispered. "You're safe now." As the triplets fell into a deep and exhausted sleep, John sat in the driver's seat, determined to stay awake. He gazed up at the stars through the windshield, making a silent promise to protect these three innocent souls and help them find a new home. The night wore on, and the world around the parked truck was quiet. Inside the cab, three brothers slept in each other's arms, seeking comfort even in their dreams. Though the future remained uncertain, at least for this night, they were safe, warm, and, most importantly, together. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink as Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael woke, huddled together on the bunk in John's truck. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to believe it had all been a nightmare. But reality soon forced its way in, cruel and inescapable. True to his word, John took them to the nearest police station. However, the authorities seemed overwhelmed and only mildly interested in the case of three abandoned boys. After hours of waiting and superficial questioning, it became clear there would be no quick solution. "I'm sorry, kids," John said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I have to keep moving, but here," he handed Lucas, the oldest, a few bills. "This should help you for a few days." With heavy hearts, the triplets watched John leave, leaving them alone in an unfamiliar town. Lucas gripped his brother's hands tightly. "We'll stick together," he said, his voice resolute. "We got this." The first days were the hardest. They wandered the streets, frightened and hungry, sleeping in alleyways and abandoned buildings. Gabriel, always practical, suggested they ration the money John had given them. "We need to make it last as long as we can," he explained, carefully counting the bills. Raphael, the most sensitive, cried silently at night, missing the comfort of a home. Lucas would hug him, whispering words of reassurance even as his own heart was broken. Gradually, however, they began to learn the rhythms of the street. They discovered which dumpsters behind restaurants had still edible food, which parks had working water fountains, and which abandoned buildings offered the best shelter from the night's cold. One morning, while checking a dumpster behind a bakery, they were startled by the shop owner. Instead of chasing them off, though, the middle-aged man looked at them with compassion. "You look hungry," he said gently. "Come on in. I've got some day-old bread that's still good." That act of kindness was the first of many. Soon, the boys discovered there were people willing to help, even in small ways. The owner of a fruit stall often gave them bruised produce she couldn't sell. An elderly shoemaker sometimes let them sleep in his workshop on especially cold nights. Lucas, ever the leader, suggested they offer to work for food. "We can sweep sidewalks, wash windows, anything," he told his brothers. Gabriel readily agreed. "Yeah, and I'm good with math. Maybe some store needs help with inventory." Raphael, though shy, found he had a knack for winning people over with his sweet smile and sad eyes. He often secured the best offers for food or temporary shelter. Working together, the triplets managed to get at least one meal a day and a relatively safe place to sleep at night. It was not an easy life, but they were surviving. Nights, however, remained the hardest. Huddled together in some hidden corner, the boys clung to each other for warmth, both physical and emotional. "Remember," Lucas would whisper every night, "we're stronger together. No one can separate us." Gabriel often woke in the middle of the night, his eyes vigilant for any sign of danger. He had become his brother's silent guardian. Raphael, meanwhile, kept their hope alive. "One day," he would say softly, "we'll have a real home again. I just know it." As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the triplets developed a routine. In the morning, they looked for odd jobs, sweeping sidewalks, running errands, carrying groceries. By afternoon, they scouted safe places to spend the night. And at night, they told each other stories, keeping the memories of happier times alive. But life on the streets was harsh and unforgiving. There were days of hunger, nights of biting cold, and moments of despair so deep that even the optimistic Raphael felt his hope waver. It was on one of those difficult nights that Lucas made a solemn vow. Gathering his brothers into a tight embrace, he spoke with a firm voice. "I promise you, no matter what happens, we'll always stay together. We're a family, and families never give up on each other." Gabriel and Raphael nodded, silent tears streaking their grimy faces. In that moment, they reaffirmed their pledge to one another, a silent promise of protection and unconditional love. The streets could be cruel, the world unfair, but the triplets had one another, and as long as they were together, there was hope. They faced each new day with courage, determination, and an unbreakable bond of love that united them. And so, Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael continued their struggle for survival. 3 small souls against the world, but strong in their unity. The future was still uncertain, but they faced it together, one day at a time. The sun had barely risen when Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael emerged from their current hideout, an abandoned storage shed behind an old shop. Now 10 years old, the triplets had grown, yet still carried in their eyes the weight of their experiences. Lucas, the first to step out, stretched and scanned the area with alert eyes. 4 years on the streets had turned him into a natural leader, always on guard. "All clear," he whispered to his brothers. Gabriel followed, mentally mapping out the day ahead. His knack for numbers had become a valuable tool in their daily fight for survival. "We have to be at Mr. Joseph's stall in 20 minutes, he reminded them. Raphael, last to emerge, carried a battered bag containing their few belongings. His smile, though more reserved now, still had the power to brighten even the darkest days. "Let's go," he said, his voice soft but determined. The routine they had established over the years was almost military in its precision. Every minute of the day was carefully planned to maximize their chances of survival. Their first stop was always Mrs. Mary's bakery. The elderly woman, with a heart of gold, always saved day-old bread for them. "Good morning, my angels," she greeted them warmly. "Here you go, eat it while it's still warm." With partially satisfied bellies, the boys headed to their main job at Mr. Joseph's newsstand. The middle-aged man had taken a liking to the triplets about a year ago, offering them steady work in exchange for some coins and, more importantly, a safe place to stay during the day. "Ah, there you are," exclaimed Mr. Joseph upon seeing them. "We've got lots to do today. The new Superman movie is premiering, and everyone wants to read the reviews." The boys got right to work. Lucas, with his charismatic personality, excelled at attracting customers. Gabriel handled the cash register, his quick mind calculating change with impressive accuracy. Raphael, with his gentle smile, was great at calming even the most irritable clients. As the morning wore on, various local shopkeepers stopped by the stand, many pausing to chat with the boys. The electronics store owner asked if they could help carry some boxes later. The florist offered a few flowers for them to sell, promising they could keep part of the profit. It was a hard life, but the triplets had found a kind of stability. They had food most days, a job that gave them purpose, and a network of people who, if not able to provide a home, at least offered small acts of kindness. Near noon, when things slowed down at the stand, something unusual happened. A well-dressed man in a pristine suit, exuding an air of refinement, approached the stand. "Good morning," he said, his deep, polite voice betraying his distinguished demeanor. "I'm looking for today's paper, the Times. Do you have it?" Lucas quickly located the requested paper, while Gabriel calculated the price. Raphael, watching the man curiously, noticed something in his eyes, a mixture of surprise and recognition. The man took the newspaper but didn't leave. Instead, he looked from one boy to the next, an intrigued expression on his face. "Are you Triplets?" he asked softly. The boys exchanged quick glances, a silent communication they had mastered over the years. Life on the streets had taught them to be wary of strangers who asked too many questions. "Yes, sir," Lucas finally answered, his voice polite but firm. The man nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. "My name is Peter Dubois," he said, extending his hand. "I'm a lawyer." The boys eyed his outstretched hand with hesitation. Raphael was the one who finally shook it, guided by an instinct that told him this man posed no threat. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Peter continued, his gaze studying each of the triplets intently. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Before any of the boys could respond, Mr. Joseph returned to the stand. "Ah, I see you've met our little helpers," he said cheerfully. "These boys are treasures, Mr. Dubois. They work hard and they're sharp as tacks." Peter smiled, but his eyes never left the triplets. "Yes, I can see that," he murmured. "Tell me, how long have they been working for you?" While Mr. Joseph and Peter talked, the boys exchanged worried looks. There was something about the way this lawyer observed them that made them uneasy, as if they were puzzle pieces he was trying to fit together. When Peter finally left, promising to return the next day, the triplets felt as though something had changed. The air seemed charged with possibility, and for the first time in a long while, hope. "Did you see how he looked at us?" Gabriel whispered once Peter was out of earshot. Lucas nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, he recognized us from somewhere." Raphael, always intuitive, spoke softly. "I think our lives are about to change, brothers." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city, the triplets carried on with their work, their minds brimming with questions. Who was Peter Dubois really? Why did he seem so interested in them? And more importantly, what would tomorrow bring? Night fell over the city, cloaking it in a darkness punctuated by streetlights. For 3 10-year-olds accustomed to facing each day as a fight for survival, the future suddenly seemed less bleak and a bit more promising. The sun had barely begun to warm the city streets when Peter Dubois returned to the newsstand. His keen eyes soon spotted the triplets, already busy with their morning tasks. He watched them for a moment, fascinated by the almost supernatural synchronicity between the three. Lucas organized the magazines, his movements efficient and precise. Gabriel Khan, with a focused look, counted change for a customer. Raphael, one smiling gently, handed a newspaper to an elderly lady. It was a well-rehearsed dance, each one playing his part with a maturity beyond their years. Peter approached, buying another paper he didn't really need. "Good morning, boys," he greeted them, his tone casual, though his curiosity was intense. "Good morning, Mr. Dubois," they responded in unison, voices polite and composed. The lawyer noticed how they moved, always staying close to one another, as if magnetically drawn. It was a behavior that spoke of years of mutual trust and reliance. "Have you been working here for long?" Peter asked, trying to make conversation. Lucas, clearly the group's spokesperson, replied, "About a year, sir. Mr. Joseph has been very good to us." Peter nodded, impressed by the boy's eloquence. "And before that, where did you go to school?" A flicker of tension crossed the triplets' faces. Gabriel answered this time, his voice carefully neutral. "We moved a lot, sir. We were homeschooled." Peter sensed the evasion but didn't press the issue. Instead, he shifted the conversation to their interests and dreams. To his surprise, the boys brightened up, revealing a depth of knowledge and aspiration that contradicted their current situation. Lucas spoke of his love for literature, naming authors many adults wouldn't have read. Gabriel demonstrated impressive math skills, solving mental calculations that Peter proposed. Raphael, the quietest, surprised the lawyer with his artistic sensitivity. describing vivid paintings he dreamed of creating. As the conversation flowed, Peter felt his curiosity transform into a growing certainty. There was something special about these boys, something familiar he couldn't quite identify. Just then, Mr. Joseph joined them, carrying a tray of sandwiches. "Lunchtime, boys," he announced cheerfully. "Mr. Dubois, would you like to join us?" Peter accepted, seeing it as a chance to learn more. As they ate, he observed how the triplets shared the food, always making sure each had an equal share, a simple yet revealing gesture. "You're very close," Peter commented. "It must be special to be triplets." The boys exchanged looks. Once again, a silent conversation that passed between them. Raphael finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "We're all each other has, Mr. Dubois." Something in Raphael's tone struck Peter deeply. There was a sadness there, an untold story the lawyer was determined to uncover. "I remind me a lot of a case I worked on some years back," Peter said, watching the boys' reactions carefully. "It was about a family, the Dumonts, if I recall correctly. The effect was immediate. The triplets froze, their eyes widening with recognition and fear. Lucas dropped the sandwich he was holding, Gabriel nearly choked on a sip of water, and Raphael turned pale as a ghost. Peter knew he'd touched on something crucial. Gently, he continued, "Thomas Dumont was a client of mine, a good man, who loved his family very much." His words seemed to break an invisible barrier. Suddenly, tears started rolling down Raphael's face. Gabriel put a protective arm around him, while Lucas stared at Peter with a mix of defiance and hope. How did you know our father?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The confirmation hit Peter like a lightning bolt. These were Thomas Dumont's children, the boys who had mysteriously disappeared 4 years ago, leaving behind an unclaimed fortune and a mystery that had haunted Peter ever since. "I was Thomas's personal lawyer," Peter explained gently, aware of the storm of emotions his revelation had unleashed. "He spoke of you often, always with so much love and pride." Tears now flowed freely down the boys' faces. Years of secrecy and bottled-up pain seemed to pour out at once. We thought nobody cared," Gabriel sobbed, "that everyone had forgotten us." Peter's heart clenched. "Never," he said firmly. "Thomas left everything to you. I've spent years trying to find you, trying to figure out what happened." Lucas, mustering all his courage, looked Peter in the eye. "It was her," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Our mother. She abandoned us on the road, told us to disappear from her life." Peter was shocked. He knew Claire, Thomas's widow, had vanished shortly after the boys, taking a substantial amount of money with her, but abandoning children, her own children. It was almost unimaginable. "Boys," Peter said, his voice filled with compassion and resolve, "you're safe now. I promise I will do everything in my power to right this terrible wrong." Mr. Joseph, who had listened quietly, tears in his eyes, spoke up. "They're good kids, Mr. Dubois. They deserve a better chance in life." Peter nodded, his mind already racing with the legal and practical implications of what he'd discovered. "Would you trust me to help you?" he asked the triplets. The boys looked at one another, years of unspoken communication passing among them. Finally, Lucas spoke for all three. "Yes, Mr. Dubois, we trust you." In that moment, under the midday sun at a simple newsstand, the fate of 3 young lives changed drastically. Peter knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, legal issues, emotional trauma, years of lost education to catch up on. But looking at the hopeful faces of the triplets, he knew every effort would be worth it. "Well, boys," Peter said, a determined smile on his face, "we have a lot of work to do. How about we start by finding you a more comfortable place to stay tonight?" As the triplets gathered their few belongings and bid an emotional farewell to Mr. Joseph, Peter made a silent promise. He would unravel the mystery behind their abandonment, retrieve the inheritance that was rightfully theirs, and, most importantly, ensure Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael finally had the home and family they deserved. The Dumont case, which had haunted Peter for years, was about to gain a new chapter, and this time he was determined to secure a happy ending. Peter Dubois' office, usually a sanctuary of order and calm, was now covered in papers, files, and old documents. The lawyer had spent the past few weeks locked in a frenetic investigation, determined to unravel the mystery surrounding the Dumont triplets. Peter rubbed his tired eyes, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 2 in the morning, but he hardly noticed the time. Each new discovery led him deeper into the labyrinth of lies and fraud that Claire, the boy's mother, had constructed. How could she? Peter muttered to himself, holding a photo of Claire with Thomas and the triplets, all smiling for the camera. It was an image of perfect happiness, but now he knew it was all a facade. His secretary, Marie, slipped quietly into the office with another cup of coffee. "You should rest a bit, Peter," she said kindly. Peter shook his head. "I can't, Marie. Not while those boys... You should see how they live. They're in a temporary shelter, still scared, waiting for someone to abandon them again at any moment." Marie nodded sympathetically. "What have you found out so far?" Peter took a deep breath, mentally organizing the information. "It's worse than we imagined. Claire not only abandoned the boys, she forged Thomas's will." He picked up a document, showing it to Marie. "This is the original will. Thomas left everything to the triplets, naming Claire as the trustee until they came of age. But look at this." He held up another document. "This is the will that was submitted after Thomas's death. In it, Claire is the main beneficiary." Marie gasped, shocked. But how did she manage that? "Forgery," Peter explained, his voice full of disgust. "She must have had help from someone inside the legal system. I'm looking into that too." Peter stood, walking to the window. The city slept outside, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside this office. The worst part is that she didn't just steal the money from the boys. She abandoned them, Marie. Left 3 6-year-olds alone on a deserted road. Marie felt tears pricking her eyes. "Those poor kids, how did they survive?" Peter turned around, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "They're incredible, Marie. Strong, intelligent, united. They took care of each other for 4 years on the streets, but now it's our turn to take care of them." Returning to his desk, he picked up another set of documents. "I found bank records showing large transfers to offshore accounts right after Claire disappeared. She planned all of this. Marie married Thomas for money, waited for the right moment, then vanished with millions." Marie shook her head in disbelief. "So what do we do now?" Peter smiled, a determined smile Marie knew well. It was the smile he wore when he was about to dive into a legal battle he knew he could win. "Now," he said, "we start fighting back. First, we'll invalidate the fraudulent will and restore the boys' rights as legitimate heirs. Then we'll trace every cent Claire stole and bring it home." He paused, his expression softening. "But more important than the money, Marie, is giving those boys a home, a family." Marie nodded, understanding what went unspoken. "You're thinking of adopting them, aren't you?" Peter looked momentarily surprised, then smiled. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to someone who knows you well," Marie replied gently. "I think you'd make a wonderful father to them, Peter." The lawyer sat again, his mind racing with possibilities and plans. "First, we need to ensure their legal safety. I'll file for temporary guardianship first thing tomorrow. Then we need to start their formal education. 4 years on the street, and they have a lot of catching up to do." Marie jotted down some notes. "I'll contact some private schools that can be discreet. They'll likely need intensive tutoring before joining a regular class." Peter nodded, grateful for Marie's efficiency. "Excellent. We'll also need a therapist specialized in child trauma. And maybe a nutritionist. I want to make sure we meet all their needs." As the two continued planning, the sun began to rise, sending its first rays of light through the office window. Peter gazed at the new day with a renewed sense of hope. "Marie," he said softly, "I think it's time we visit the boys. They deserve to know what we've found." An hour later, Peter and Marie arrived at the temporary shelter where Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael were staying. They found the triplets sitting together in a corner of the cafeteria, eating quietly and watching the other children with cautious eyes. "Good morning, boys," Peter greeted them gently. The 3 looked up simultaneously, their faces lighting up at the sight of the lawyer. "Mr. Dubois!" they exclaimed in unison. Peter smiled, feeling his heart warm at their response. I have some news for you. Can we talk in private? The boys nodded, following Peter and Marie to a small meeting room. Once inside, Peter took a deep breath, preparing for the difficult conversation ahead. Lucas, Gabriel, Raphael, he began, looking each of them in the eye. I've discovered some things about what happened to you and your father. Over the next few minutes, Peter gently explained about the forged will, Claire's actions, and the money that had been stolen from them. The boys listened silently, their expressions a mix of shock, sadness, and, unexpectedly, relief. So, it wasn't our fault? Raphael asked in a quiet voice, tears glistening in his eyes. Peter's heart ached. No, Raphael, none of this was your fault. You're the victims of a terrible crime, and I promise we'll fix it. Lucas, ever the protector, asked, What happens now, Mr. Dubois? Peter smiled, once again impressed by the boy's maturity. Now, we start fighting for your rights. I'm going to file for temporary guardianship, so we can get you out of this shelter. After that, we'll work on recovering your inheritance and getting you the education and care you deserve. Gabriel, the most pragmatic, frowned slightly. But what if she comes back? What if she tries to take us again? Peter leaned forward, his voice firm and resolute. That's not going to happen, Gabriel. I promise you three. I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe and together. You'll never have to go through what you went through before. The triplets exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing among them. Finally, Lucas spoke for all of them. We trust you, Mr. Dubois. Peter felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Thank you, boys. That trust means a lot to me. Now, how about we talk about some plans for the future? I have ideas about school, therapy, and maybe even some art lessons for you, Raphael. As Peter and Marie began outlining the next steps with the boys, the lawyer felt a growing certainty. This would not be just another legal battle. It was a mission to right a great wrong, to bring justice, and above all to give three brave boys the chance at a life that had been stolen from them. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but looking at the hopeful faces of the triplets, Peter knew every obstacle would be worth it. The legal battle was just beginning, but the battle for the hearts and the future of these boys, that was one Peter had already won. Peter Dubois' office was buzzing with activity. After weeks of intense investigation, the lawyer finally felt he had all the pieces of the puzzle in hand. On his desk, a thick folder held the fruits of his meticulous work, documents, photos, bank records, and statements, all carefully organized and ready for use. Peter flipped through the folder once more, making sure he hadn't overlooked anything. There lay the proof of Claire's fraud, Thomas's original will, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and even testimonies from bank employees who had been coerced into aiding the scheme. Marie, Peter called, his voice filled with resolve. Were you able to find Claire's current address? His faithful secretary walked into the office, holding a piece of paper. Yes, Peter. It wasn't easy, but we finally traced her. She's living in a mansion on the outskirts of town using the name Celeste Renard. Peter shook his head, a mixture of disgust and triumph on his face. Celeste Renard, the fox, fitting for someone so cunning. He stood by the window, gazing out at the city. Peter knew the next step would be the hardest, preparing the boys for the looming confrontation with the woman who had abandoned them. Marie, please call the boys. It's time we discuss the plan with them. Minutes later, Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael entered the office. In the month since Peter had found them, the triplets had blossomed. Well-fed, properly clothed, and receiving the education they'd been denied for years, they looked like entirely different children. Still, their eyes carried a hint of the shadows from the hardships they'd endured. Have a seat, boys, Peter said gently. We have something important to discuss. The three settled on a sofa, their gazes flicking between Peter and the thick folder on his desk. We've found your mother, Peter said bluntly, watching the boys' reactions closely. Lucas, ever the protector, visibly tensed. Gabriel's brow furrowed, his analytical mind already processing the implications. Raphael, the most sensitive, paled slightly. What does that mean for us? Lucas asked, his voice steady despite the obvious anxiety. Peter leaned forward, his gaze kind but unwavering. "It means we can finally confront her, demand answers, and most importantly, recover what rightfully belongs to you." He opened the folder, showing the boys some of the evidence he had gathered. "We have enough proof not just to revoke the fraudulent will, but also to charge Claire criminally for what she did." Gabriel, always the pragmatist, asked, "And what happens then?" "She goes to jail." Peter nodded. "Most likely, yes, but the most important thing is that you get back the inheritance your father left for you. You'll be able to live the life Thomas wanted you to have." Raphael, who had remained silent, finally spoke, his voice nearly a whisper. Do we have to see her?" Peter's heart clenched at the fear in the boy's voice. "I know it's scary, Raphael, but yes, I think it's important that you're there. Not to confront her directly, but so she sees that you survived, that you're strong, and that you have people who truly care for you now." Lucas placed a protective arm around Raphael. "We'll be together the whole time, right?" "Absolutely," Peter assured him. "I'll be with you every step of the way, and if at any point it becomes too much, we can leave immediately." The triplets exchanged looks, holding another of their silent conversations that Peter had come to respect. Finally, Lucas spoke for them all. "Okay, Mr. Dubois, we trust you. When do we do this?" Peter smiled, proud of the boy's courage. "We'll give you a little time to prepare emotionally. How about next week? Friday?" The boys agreed, and Peter explained the plan in detail. They would go to the mansion where Claire was staying. Peter would present the evidence and demand a confession. If all went well, the police would be called and Claire would be arrested on the spot. In the days that followed, Peter worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in order. He contacted the authorities, prepared all the necessary legal documents, and even hired a child trauma therapist to be on standby, should the boys need immediate emotional support after the confrontation. Finally, the day arrived. Peter woke before dawn, mentally reviewing every detail as he got ready. When he reached the house where the triplets were temporarily living, under the care of a carefully selected foster family, he found them already awake and dressed. "Ready, boys?" Peter asked, his gentle tone masking his own nervousness. They nodded, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. They got into Peter's car, each holding the other's hand firmly. The drive to Claire's mansion was quiet. Peter occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the boys staring out the window, lost in their own thoughts. He knew this journey was more than a physical trip. It was an emotional one, a confrontation with the past they had fought so hard to overcome. As they neared their destination, the surroundings changed. Modest houses gave way to larger, more luxurious properties, until they finally reached a grand wrought iron gate. Peter stopped the car. "We're here, boys," he said softly. "Last chance. Are you sure you want to do this?" Lucas glanced at his brothers, then back at Peter. His voice was steady as he replied, "Yes, Mr. Dubois, we're ready." Peter nodded, once more admiring the courage of these young survivors who had already faced more hardship in their short lives than many adults ever would. He pressed the intercom next to the gate. After a few moments of silence, a female voice answered, "Renard Residence. How may I help you?" Peter took a deep breath. It was now or never. "My name is Peter Dubois. I'm here to see Claire Dumont. Or should I say, Celeste Renard?" There was a long silence. Then the gate began to open slowly. Peter looked at the triplets in the mirror once more. "Remember, boys, you're stronger than she is. You survived, you thrived, and now you're here to take back what's rightfully yours." With those words of encouragement, Peter drove through the gates, heading toward the imposing mansion ahead. The confrontation that would forever alter the Dumont triplets' lives was about to begin. The morning was surprisingly still, as Peter Dubois' car made its way down the long driveway leading to Claire's mansion. Dew still glistened on the well-tended lawn, and the only sound was the gentle call of birds greeting the day. Peter parked the car and turned to the back seat, where Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael sat, their hands intertwined in mutual support. "Remember, boys," he said softly, "you don't have to say a word if you don't want to. I'm here to protect you." The triplets nodded in unison. their faces equal parts resolve and fear. Together, they followed Peter to the mansion's impressive front door. Peter took a deep breath and rang the bell. The sound echoed through the house, and for a moment, all was silent. Then came the sound of footsteps from the other side. The doorknob turned, and the door opened slowly. Claire Dumont, now calling herself Celeste Renard, stood on the threshold. At 39, she was still a striking woman, wearing a silk robe and with hair styled perfectly, as if prepared for a fashion shoot. For a brief instant, she wore a practiced smile, the sort of polite expression one uses for unexpected visitors. But then her eyes shifted from Peter to the three figures behind him. The smile froze on her face. Claire's eyes widened in shock, her complexion visibly paling. She staggered backward, clutching the doorframe to keep herself upright. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael remained still, their eyes locked on the woman who had abandoned them 4 years earlier. Their young faces showed a swirl of emotions: fear, anger, confusion, and, surprisingly, a trace of pity. Claire brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. Her gaze drifted over each boy's face, recognizing every feature she had tried to forget. Lucas with his determined eyes, Gabriel with his thoughtful expression, Raphael with his gentle demeanor. My boys," she stammered, her voice trembling. At that moment, Peter stepped forward, protectively placing himself in front of the triplets. "Mrs. Dumont," he said, his voice firm and professional. "Or should I say Mrs. Renard? My name is Peter Dubois. I'm an attorney, and we're here to discuss some urgent legal matters with you." Claire blinked, as though waking from a trance. Her eyes flicked from Peter to the boys and back again. I don't understand," she said weakly. How did you find them?" Peter kept his expression neutral. "We can talk about that. May we come in?" Claire hesitated, her eyes lingering once more on the triplets. It was clear she was struggling to process what was happening. For a moment, it seemed she might slam the door in their faces, but then Raphael took a small step forward. "Mum," he said, his voice soft and trembling. The sound of Raphael's voice seemed to break something within Claire. Tears began streaming down her face, and she staggered back, allowing them to enter. Peter gently guided the boys inside, keeping himself between them and Claire. The mansion's interior was as luxurious as the exterior suggested, filled with expensive furniture and artwork. Claire led them to a spacious living room, collapsing into an armchair. Her eyes never left the triplets, who sat together on a couch with Peter beside them. I thought you were dead," Claire finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas, always the protector, was the first to speak. "We almost died," he said, surprisingly calm. "But we survived, together." Claire covered her face with her hands, silent sobs shaking her frame. "I'm sorry," she murmured through her tears. "I'm so sorry." Peter observed the scene with a mix of compassion and determination. At last, he spoke. "Mrs. Dumont, I understand this is a shock for you, but there are serious matters we need to address, legal matters that can't be ignored." Claire lowered her hands, looking at Peter with a mixture of fear and resignation. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. Peter nodded gravely. "Yes, we know everything. The forged will, the diverted funds, and the boys' abandonment. We're here to correct these wrongs." Claire closed her eyes, as if bracing for the inevitable. When she opened them, a sad resolve glimmered there. "I guess there's no running from this anymore, is there?" "No," Peter confirmed, "there isn't." He opened his folder, placing a stack of documents on the coffee table. "Now, Mrs. Dumont, let's discuss what happened 4 years ago and how we plan to resolve this situation." As Peter began laying out the evidence they had gathered, the triplets remained silent, watching the woman they had once called Mother. Despite everything they had endured, their young hearts carried a complexity of emotions. Anger and hurt, yes, but also a flicker of compassion for the broken figure before them. The confrontation they had feared and anticipated for so long was finally happening. And although the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear: Nothing would ever be the same after this morning. The panic in Claire's eyes was palpable. For an instant, she tried to shut the door, her fingers gripping the handle in desperation. "You can't be here," she murmured, more to herself than to her visitors. "This can't be happening." Peter, anticipating her reaction, gently yet firmly prevented the door from closing. "Mrs. Dumont," he said calmly but authoritatively, "shutting the door won't make this go away. It's best if we resolve it now." Claire looked at the triplets, her eyes moving from one face to the next, as if seeing ghosts. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she stepped back, allowing them to enter. The mansion was a testament to the wealth Claire had amassed over the years. Expensive artwork graced the walls, and designer furniture filled the rooms. Everything screamed opulence, a cruel contrast to the life the boys had been forced to live on the streets. She led them to a spacious living area, sinking into a leather armchair. Her eyes never left the triplets, who sat together on a sofa, Peter by their side. "Please," Claire implored, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." Peter raised his hand, stopping her. "Before any explanations, Mrs. Dumont, there are some things we need to establish." He opened his folder, removing a stack of carefully organized papers. "First," he began, his voice professional and firm, "we have here the original will of Thomas Dumont." He slid the document across the coffee table. "As you can see, he left everything to the boys, naming you as administrator until they reached adulthood." Claire went pale, her eyes fixed on the paper. Peter continued, relentless. "Now compare it to this." He placed another document next to the first. "This is the will submitted after Thomas's death. Notice the glaring differences." Claire shut her eyes, as if hoping the documents would vanish. When she opened them again, tears streaked her face. I had no choice," she whispered. "There's always a choice, Mrs. Dumont," Peter replied, his voice steely. "You chose to forge the will. You chose to steal from your own children. And then—" He paused, casting a compassionate glance at the boys before turning back to Claire. "You chose to abandon them." He laid more documents on the table, bank statements showing large transfers to offshore accounts, purchase records for the mansion under the name Celeste Renard, and police reports of 3 boys found roaming the streets, hungry and frightened. Each new paper was like a blow to Claire. She watched in horror as her carefully constructed world crumbled before her eyes. How did you find all this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Peter leaned in, his gaze intense. "Truth has a way of coming out, Mrs. Dumont, especially when people are determined to uncover it." Then he turned to the triplets. "Boys, would you like to say something?" Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael exchanged glances. Gabriel spoke first, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did you do this to us?" Claire broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. I wasn't thinking straight. The money, the idea of a luxurious life, it blinded me. I thought you'd be fine." Lucas, his eyes reflecting anger and hurt, replied, "Fine? We were 6 years old. You left us on a deserted road." Raphael, always the most sensitive, said nothing, but silent tears ran down his cheeks, expressing everything words could not. Claire looked at her children, the weight of her actions finally descending upon her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Peter watched the painful scene, his heart heavy. At last, he spoke again. "Mrs. Dumont, I understand this is difficult, but we need to discuss the legal ramifications of your actions." He outlined the charges Claire would face: fraud, theft, child abandonment. The list seemed endless. Claire listened, her face growing paler with each accusation. What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Peter sighed. "Well, we have 2 options. We can take this to court, where all this evidence will be presented publicly, or—" Claire looked at him, a spark of hope in her eyes. Or you can voluntarily confess, return all the stolen money, and fully cooperate with the authorities. It may result in a lighter sentence." Claire glanced at the triplets, then back at Peter. And the boys." They will regain their rightful inheritance, Peter said firmly. As for any relationship with you, well, that's something they'll have to decide for themselves in time. Silence fell over the room. Claire seemed to have aged years in mere minutes, the weight of her actions finally settling on her shoulders. Finally, she spoke, her voice sounding defeated. I'll do whatever it takes. I want to make this right. Even if it's too late. Peter nodded gravely. I'll call the authorities. In the meantime, he looked to the triplets. Do you have anything else you want to say to your mother? The boys exchanged another look, a silent conversation passing among them. Raphael finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. We survived, Mom, without you, and we'll keep surviving. But maybe one day we can try to understand why. Claire choked back a sob, the words of her most sensitive child striking her to the core. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of something she'd lost long ago. Hope. As Peter called the police, the triplets remained seated, together and strong. They had faced their past and, though the future was still uncertain, they knew they would face it together as they always had. The silence following Claire's confession was heavy, almost tangible. She sat there, broken, in her expensive leather armchair, a shadow of who she was just an hour earlier. Her eyes, once bright with confidence, now appeared dull, fixed on a distant point as though she were watching her meticulously constructed world collapse. Peter was about to speak again when the sound of a key turning in the front door echoed through the mansion. Claire startled, her eyes widening in panic. "Oh no," she whispered. "Henry?" Before anyone could react, a tall, well-dressed man entered the room. He stopped abruptly, taking in the startling scene. His wife, pale and visibly shaken, a man in a suit he didn't recognize, and 3 identical boys sitting on the sofa. "Celeste?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "What's going on here?" Claire stood unsteadily. "Henry, dear, I can explain." Peter, understanding the significance of the moment, stepped in smoothly. "Mr. Renard, I presume. My name is Peter Dubois. I'm an attorney, and we're here to address some urgent legal matters with your wife." Henry frowned, looking from Peter to Claire, and then at the boys. "Legal matters? What sort of legal matters? And who are these kids?" Claire took a step toward her husband, hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Henry, please, it's not what you think." But Henry's focus had shifted to the triplets. His eyes narrowed in recognition. "Wait a minute, I've seen these boys before, in an old photo in your office. You said they were nephews who had passed away." Claire's face turned even paler, if possible. I can explain." Sensing the situation was about to explode, Peter decided honesty was the best course. "Mr. Renard, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but the woman you know as Celeste Renard isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Claire Dumont, and these," he gestured to the triplets, "are her children." Henry staggered as though he'd been punched. Turning to Claire, his eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. "What? Celeste? What is he talking about?" Claire, realizing her world was collapsing around her, let out a strangled sob. "Henry, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this." Peter pressed on, his voice calm yet firm. "Mr. Renard, your wife is involved in serious fraud and child abandonment. She forged her late husband's will, stole millions that should have gone to these children, and abandoned them on a deserted road 4 years ago." Henry looked at Claire, horrified. That can't be true." "Celeste, tell me it's not true." But Claire only hung her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Henry. I never wanted this to happen. I did fall in love with you. That was real." Henry stumbled backward, leaning against the wall for support. "Was everything a lie? Our marriage, our life together, all of it built on lies?" The triplets watched silently, their expressions a mix of shock and pity. Lucas, always the protector, pulled his brothers closer, as if shielding them from the emotional whirlwind unfolding before them. Peter, sensing it was time to wrap up this painful scene, spoke again. "Mr. Renard, I understand this is a huge shock, but there are serious legal matters at hand. The police are on their way, and your wife will have to answer for her actions." Henry turned to Peter, then looked at the boys, and finally at Claire. His voice was a broken whisper. 4 years, we've lived together for 4 years. And I never suspected, never imagined. Claire took a step toward him, but Henry recoiled. "No," he said, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "Stay away from me. I don't know you. I never did." At that moment, the sound of sirens cut through the air, drawing closer. Claire sank back into her armchair, the fight gone from her body. "It's over," she murmured. "It's all over." Henry, still leaning against the wall, looked at the triplets. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. If I had known." Gabriel, ever the practical one, spoke for the first time since Henry's arrival. "It's not your fault, sir. You were deceived too." The boy's words seemed to shake Henry deeply. He nodded slowly, then turned to Peter. "What happens now?" Peter sighed. "The police will take Mrs. Dumont for questioning. There will be a case, and she'll likely face criminal charges. As for the assets, well, that will be determined legally, but most of it will probably be returned to the boys, the rightful heirs." Henry nodded again, his face a mask of shock and sadness. "I understand. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. I don't want anything that was obtained illegally." The sirens were now very close, and soon cars could be heard stopping in front of the mansion. Claire remained seated, motionless, as if all her fight had left her. As the police entered the house, Peter turned to the triplets. "It's okay, boys. You've been incredibly brave today. It's almost over." Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael hugged one another, their expressions a blend of relief and apprehension. They had faced their past, confronted the woman who had abandoned them, and were about to witness her arrest. As the officers handcuffed Claire and led her away, the boys watched in silence. There was no joy in their eyes, just a resigned sadness. The empire of lies Claire had built was finally crumbling, but the emotional toll on everyone involved was immense. Peter placed a gentle hand on each boy's shoulder. "Let's go home," he said softly. "You were amazingly strong today. I'm very proud of you." As they left the mansion, the triplets glanced back one last time. The darkest chapter of their lives was finally closing, but the future, though uncertain, now seemed a bit brighter. Together, as they had always been, they were ready to face whatever came next. Silence hung over the living room as Claire sat there, defeated, tears staining her cheeks as she trembled uncontrollably. She clasped her shaking hands together in her lap, trying in vain to stop the constant flow of tears. I confess," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I forged the will. I abandoned the boys. Peter raised a hand, cutting her off. "Wait, Mrs. Dumont, there's more." All eyes turned to the lawyer as he slowly opened his folder again. He pulled out a yellowed envelope from the bottom, his expression somber as he held it up. "This document," Peter began, his voice grave, "was found in a secret safe in the old Dumont mansion. It has been authenticated by experts and is undoubtedly the true final will of Thomas Dumont." Claire's face went even paler. But the will was already submitted. Peter interrupted again. "The will you submitted, Mrs. Dumont, was a forgery. This is the original." He opened the envelope and began to read. "I, Thomas Dumont, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. I leave my entire fortune, properties, and assets to my beloved children, Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael Dumont, in equal shares. These assets shall be held in a trust until they reach the age of majority." Peter paused, his eyes shifting to Claire. "There is no mention of you, Mrs. Dumont, not a cent." Shock rippled through the room. Henry, Claire's current husband, staggered backward as if physically struck. The triplets wore expressions of surprise and confusion. Claire seemed frozen. Her eyes were wide, locked on the document in Peter's hands. "No," she whispered, "that can't be." Peter pressed on, relentless. "The will goes on to say that, in the event of Thomas's premature death, custody of the children should pass to his sister, not you, Claire. Thomas knew you were unreliable with finances, and wanted to protect the boy's future. Each word hit Claire like a physical blow. She shrank in her chair, her face a mask of horror and despair. "Not only did you abandon your children, Mrs. Dumont," Peter said, his voice laden with reproach, "you stole from them everything. Every cent you've spent over these last 4 years legally belonged to these boys." Henry Fratt, who had been silent until that moment, finally spoke. His voice trembled with rage and disappointment. "So it wasn't just me you were fooling. You stole from your own children, innocent kids." Claire tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She looked at the triplets, her face twisted in shame and agony. Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael stood quietly, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and sadness. They had spent 4 years on the streets, fighting to survive, while their mother lived luxuriously on money that was rightfully theirs. I didn't know," Claire finally managed to say, her voice broken. "Thomas never told me." "It doesn't matter whether you knew about the original will or not," Peter responded firmly. "You chose to forge documents. You chose to abandon your children. Those were your decisions, Mrs. Dumont." The sound of approaching sirens broke the tense silence. Claire looked toward the window in panic, then back at Peter. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice hardly more than a whisper. Peter exhaled heavily. "You'll be arrested, Mrs. Dumont. There will be a trial, and all the assets you obtained illegally will be returned to their rightful owners." He glanced at the triplets. "Your children." As the police entered the mansion, Claire completely broke down. Years of lies, fraud, and the weight of her own actions finally crushed her. She sobbed uncontrollably as they handcuffed her and led her outside. The triplets watched in silence, their hands clasped in mutual support. They had survived abandonment, life on the streets, and now the shocking truth about their mother. Peter approached them, laying a gentle hand on each boy's shoulder. "It's over, boys," he said softly. "You are incredibly strong and brave. From now on, your lives will be different. Better." As they left the mansion, the triplets cast one final glance behind them. The darkest chapter of their story had come to an end, and although the future remained uncertain, it shone with the promise of brighter days. Together, as ever, they stood ready to start a new chapter. The sound of sirens shattered the morning stillness as police cars pulled up to the mansion. Claire, pale and defeated, was led outside, handcuffs catching the sunlight. The triplets watched silently, a complex mix of emotions playing across their young faces. Peter placed a comforting hand on each boy's shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "Now we begin the process of recovering what's rightfully yours." In the days that followed, a team of lawyers and accountants worked tirelessly to track and reclaim all the assets Claire had acquired illegally. Bank accounts were frozen, properties inventoried, and the true extent of the Dumont fortune gradually came to light. 1 week later, Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael stood at the gates of their father's original mansion. Peter and Marie were beside them, their faces reflecting the significance of the moment. "Welcome home, boys," Peter said, pushing open the gates. The triplets entered hesitantly, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of a place they barely remembered. Fragments of memories from a previous life, of happier days with their father, began to surface. "It's bigger than I remember," Gabriel murmured, always the observant one. "It feels empty," Raphael added quietly. Lucas, as ever, focused on the future. "We can make it home again," he said, determination in his voice. That evening, gathered in the grand living room, Peter and Marie made a proposal that would change their lives yet again. "Boys," Peter began gently, "Marie and I would like to become your legal guardians. We know nothing can replace your parents, but we want to offer you a home, a family." The triplets exchanged silent looks, one of their trademark wordless conversations. Finally, Lucas spoke for them all. "We would really like that, Mr. Dubois, Mrs. Marie." Marie smiled through tears of happiness. "You can call us Peter and Marie now, dear ones, or, well, whatever you feel comfortable with." In the months that followed, the Dumont mansion came alive once more. Laughter echoed down its corridors, and the aroma of home-cooked meals filled the air. Peter and Marie devoted themselves wholeheartedly to creating a loving, stable environment for the boys. Still, The triplets had not forgotten their experiences. One night over dinner, Lucas voiced an idea that had been weighing on his mind. "What if we use part of the money to help other kids like us?" he suggested. "Kids who were abandoned, living on the streets." Gabriel nodded enthusiastically. "We could set up a foundation." "And turn part of the mansion into a support center," Raphael added, his eyes shining with excitement. Peter and Marie exchanged proud looks. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Peter said. "Let's work together to make it happen." And so the Dumont Triplets Foundation was born. The mansion's east wing was transformed into a support center for homeless youth, offering shelter, education, and counseling. Now 11 other boys were actively involved, sharing their own experiences and inspiring others not to lose hope. 1 year after Claire's confrontation, the newly formed family organized a celebration, not only to mark that justice had been served and they had begun anew, but also to honor the memory of Thomas Dumont. The mansion's garden was decorated with soft lights, and a large photograph of Thomas occupied a place of honor. Friends, foundation staff, and young people helped by the center all came together for the occasion. Peter rose to make a toast, emotion coloring his voice. "Today, we celebrate not only the triumph of justice, but also the power of love and resilience." Thomas Dumont dreamed of a bright future for his children. Even though he isn't here to see it, I'm certain he'd be immensely proud of the men Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael are becoming. Standing next to Peter, the triplets had tears in their eyes. Lucas stepped forward, voice firm despite the emotion. "Our father taught us about integrity, love, and the importance of family. Even though we went through hard times, those values kept us united and strong. Today we honor his memory not just by remembering him, but by living the principles he taught us," Gabriel continued. "Through the Dumont Triplets Foundation, we hope to pass on the love and support we've received. We want other children to know that no matter how hard life seems, there's always hope." Raphael finished, his voice soft but full of conviction. "Each life we touch, each child we help, is a tribute to our Father's love and to the kindness of those who helped us along our journey." As night fell, filled with conversation, laughter, and plans for the future, the triplets found themselves momentarily alone, watching the celebration around them. "Who would have thought," Lucas murmured, "that after everything we'd be here?" Gabriel smiled. "I guess we always knew, deep down, we'd be okay as long as we stuck together." Raphael nodded, taking his brother's hands. "And now we have an even bigger family." The three looked at Peter and Marie, who were chatting happily with some of the center's young residents. Then their gaze drifted to the picture of Thomas, whose kind smile seemed to bless the scene. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. They had faced unimaginable adversity, but emerged stronger, more compassionate, and determined to make a difference in the world. As stars twinkled in the night sky, Lucas, Gabriel, and Raphael knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, as they always had. And now, with an expanded family and a clear purpose, they were ready to write the next chapters of their lives, filled with hope, love, and the determination to make the world a better place. While the band played softly, and guests mingled in the mansion's beautifully lit garden, the Dumont triplets shared a silent moment, 3 hearts beating as one. Their story had been fraught with darkness, but they had found light in each other. Surrounded by the warmth of their new family and the memory of a loving father who had wanted only the best for them, they stepped into their future, united by love, fortified by resilience, and guided by hope.